Are you aware that the security of your online transactions could be under threat from invisible adversaries lurking in the very code of the websites that you trust? Well, today on Tech Talks Daily, I'm welcoming Lynn Marks, Senior Product Director at Imperva, which is a Thales company. Lynn brings with us a wealth of expertise on the alarming rise of client-side attacks. This is something I want to talk about today. They're commonly known as Magecart attacks, and they've proliferated as our world has increasingly moved online. So, with the introduction of the new PCI DSS requirements, though, I found myself asking, what does this mean for businesses that are handling sensitive payment data? So I asked Lynn to come on here and help me unravel the complexities of these threats and also the necessary steps to safeguard against them. And thankfully, she said yes. Before we get today's guest on, I want to talk about the fact that defence contractors face immense pressure to comply with something called CMMC 2.0 security standards. And finding a secure, easy-to-use file sharing solution meeting those guidelines can be a major challenge. The federal government and federal systems integrators supporting the Department of Defence have similar compliance requirements for improving cybersecurity and data protection too. So if you are an IT admin in the defence sector, if you are tired of juggling complex security solutions, Kiteworks offers a game-changing approach to CMMC 2.0 compliance because their centralised policy management simplifies administration across the entire platform. What that means is no more productivity disruptions or difficult user training. They've done the heavy lifting with their FedRAMP authorization, so you don't have to. And yes, while other solutions complicate your workflow, Kiteworks streamlines it. So upgrade to Kiteworks and experience the perfect blend of security and simplicity. So if you're interested in accelerating your CMMC 2.0 compliance and begin addressing federal zero trust requirements with Kiteworks' universal secure file sharing platform made for defence contractors, simply visit kiteworks.com to get started, where you can learn more about this secure content platform for CMMC compliance. But now it's time to return to our regularly scheduled programming and welcome today's guest onto the mic. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to San Francisco, where Lynn is waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Lynn. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Hello, thanks so much for having me. So my name is Lynn Marks, based in San Francisco, California, and I'm a senior product manager at Imperva. And I've had the luck to work in cybersecurity for 7 years already. And at the Imperva, I get to work on really interesting problems. I own 3 products, and 2 of them are related to mitigating bots. And one of them, which is the topic for today, is about how can we prevent client-side attacks, specifically Magecart attacks for our customers.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you join me on the podcast. And Imperva are pretty much friends of the show. We've had Terry Ray on a couple of times. I think he was in Texas, so quite a few miles away. Do you know Terry? Is he still at Imperva?
Yeah, he's a great guy, very knowledgeable. And I'm sure that you all had a very interesting and fun conversation together.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to speak with him. But today is all about you. And obviously you've had a great career in cybersecurity. And every day I try and take a different topic in the industry and demystify it, put it in a language everyone understands. And one of the reasons I was excited to get you on here today was to talk about the client-side attacks, particularly in things like the Magecart attacks and how they've become so much more prevalent since 2015. I'm curious, what have you seen here? Have you seen this evolve?
So first of all, just in case some of your listeners might not be familiar with what client-side attacks or Magecart attacks are. So client-side, it's really everything that's on the end user's device, right? It's like the images, the text, and for example, all of the forms where they're entering in any information, like their login information or their credit card information. This is opposed to the server side. So what Magecart attacks are doing, it's either the name of the attack or actually the name of the group that originally popularized this. You might hear either version. But the attack itself is designed to steal data directly from the client side by targeting vulnerable JavaScript code. The way that this is done is they're either injecting JavaScript into the first-party code of the application or into the third-party code, which we call like the supply chain. And all of this, the purpose is either to steal payment information, right? So as a customer is entering in their credit card information on the checkout page, that data would not only be sent to the correct database and they'll able to finish their transaction, but it also ends up being sent to the attacker's database. So you can really think of it as a data breach that's occurring record by record. And one reason why this is so difficult to detect and why we have seen it become more prevalent is because, first of all, the application continues to work as intended. So like I mentioned in my example, right, the user's data does actually get sent to the correct database, so they're able to finish their transaction and go on with their day. And the business also thinks, well, this customer is able to finish their transaction. Nothing seems unusual, or nothing is like, throwing off like warnings. And, the business doesn't have any obvious indicators that there's actually something malicious going on. So that's definitely one reason why we've seen such an issue for this. And the second reason that I'll be talking about a lot during this conversation is really this idea of the blind spot. I think this is oftentimes something that's discussed in the security world, right? You can't protect something that you don't know exists. And what we've seen is the large majority of organizations have a blind spot to the makeup of their client side. And because the client side, the most likely thing to end up getting compromised is the JavaScript. So it is really a large issue that many organizations have a blind spot to all of the JavaScript that's actually executing on their client side. And, we always like to ask 3 questions to security practitioners that can help them better understand how well do they understand their client side. So do you know what JavaScript is running? And do you know if it's supposed to be there or it shouldn't be there? Do you know if any of the scripts are sending data outside of your application? And do you have any way to know if the JavaScript on your client side has been compromised? So for any organization that doesn't know how to properly answer even one of those, there's more of a risk for them to end up having Magecart attacks occurring on their application, and then later on having to deal with the negative repercussions that occur from a data theft like this.
So much gold in your answer there. And as you said, it's been so prevalent since 2015, but then 5 years later, 2020, something else happened. So how did that global pandemic accelerate it even further, especially the rise of client-side attacks? And what kind of vulnerabilities did it expose in digital infrastructures, just as everyone was getting the grips with working from home at scale?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say one thing, this is just an overall trend that I think even precedes the pandemic, is that more logic over time has been moved from the server side to the client side. This is in order to a lot of times provide better performance or just better usability for the end users. So just the fact that there's more logic and thus more JavaScript that's being added to the client side just means that now the risk is higher. Now, specifically around the pandemic itself, I was looking at some data from the Imperva Threat Labs. This is by our great threat research team. And shortly after the stay-at-home orders were given at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw that there was a 28% increase in online retail traffic, right? So that's a very large jump. And then, of course, as the pandemic continued, there was even a larger and larger growth of traffic that's going to online retailers, and of course, many other businesses that had to conduct their business online as opposed to in the real world like we did in the past. So I think my main interpretation of how the pandemic has accelerated this is not necessarily that it had an impact that's unique to client-side attacks, but I believe that it actually just had a more far-reaching impact and increased to many different cyber attack vectors simply because there was more business and more users were doing their business online. We know that cyber attack, the attackers themselves are just very opportunistic, right? Where there is an opportunity for them to make more money, they're going to follow it. So I believe that simply because so much more business, so much more money was going through these online retailers, that's where we saw the attackers realizing that, hey, we should probably go and attack their JavaScript and figure out how we can make a couple dollars or a couple pounds and make some money off of this great opportunity.
And a question I've got to ask is around PCI. And whenever I say PCI out loud, I get flashbacks from my own IT past. And that PCI song, I don't know if you've ever heard that, but once it gets in your head, it's a little bit like Small World from the Disney ride there. But what are the key changes introduced in the recently published PCI DSS 4.0? And how do they address the growing threat of client-side attacks here in 2024 and beyond?
That's a great question. So first of all, in case not everyone is familiar, so every couple of years, PCI releases a new version. They released 4.0 a year or two ago. Since then, this is like the hottest news in the PCI world, they actually released a revision around 6 weeks ago, and they're calling this version 4.0.1. Where they realized that some of the requirements that they have added were maybe not clear enough, or people had too many questions on how they should actually implement it. So that's why I'll be talking about language actually from 4.0.1. Yeah. But from 4.0, what they have done is they have added many different requirements, including 2 requirements that are supposed to help organizations better protect themselves from Magecart attacks or other types of client-side attacks. And if you have to be PCI compliant, you'll definitely be hearing these numbers a lot. So the first one is 6.4.3. The second one is 11.6.1. And both of these are really supposed to address the growing threat by forcing vendors to overcome their client-side blind spot. So once again, I said that I'll be talking about this blind spot a lot. And, we can see that the PCI organization saw that there was the same sort of issue where the blind spot was very prevalent. So both of these requirements are related to how can you make sure you have an inventory of all of the scripts that are executing on your payment page. How can you make sure that each one of them is authorized and that you have a written justification of it? So this is like, you can think of it as sort of forcing all of the organizations to inventory their scripts, to authorize them, and to understand why they're on there, or maybe why they shouldn't be on there because they have to write that written justification. There's a couple other requirements like details, but the other one that I really wanted to call out is that, they're also now being told that they need to set up alerting for this. So organizations are going to have to set up alerting for, first of all, if there are any new scripts that are discovered on their client side, or if there are any changes in the possible integrity of the scripts that are on there, which of course is very important. We know alerting in the security world is pertinent to being able to protect the assets they are protecting. But not only do they want to have alerting for if a new script shows, but also if the change detection mechanism that organizations have in place in order to ensure that their client side is secure, if anything is compromised about that, there also needs to be alerting put in place so that organizations can better understand, well, is my change detection mechanism actually working right now and helping me understand if there's a possible attack, or is it compromised and I need to figure out a different way to ensure that my client side is secure. So I know that was a very long answer, but really it's about how can we make organizations have a better understanding of what's actually executing on their client side.
No, beautiful answer. And if we zoom out for a moment, just for any business leader listening, and let's bring this to life a little, how will this new PCI requirement impact businesses that maybe accept or process payments online? And are there any particular steps that they should be taking to ensure that compliance too?
First of all, I would highly recommend that all organizations that have to comply with PCI go and talk to your QSAs and figure out, do I already have some kind of mechanism in place? If you don't, I would recommend that you go and get working on starting to inventory the scripts, because I don't think I actually mentioned that even though these two requirements were added as part of the release of 4.0, they actually don't become official requirements. Like, they're not going to be part of any audits until April 1st of 2025. So that means that from the time of this recording, organizations, let's say, have around 7-ish months in order to get compliant with this, so that after April 1st, when they do their next audit, they have to make sure that they can prove these things. So I would say definitely get started on inventorying your script, talking with your development team or maybe your marketing team to understand what are these scripts doing on the payment page and should they be on there. Of course, like I mentioned, alerting is a crucial part of both of the requirements. So make sure that you have alerting in place. And one of the biggest changes actually is that oftentimes organizations that have their payment processor in an iframe on their page were in the past exempt from many of the requirements. Now, with these two requirements, they're actually not exempt from having to meet these two requirements. So let's say I have a payment page. In the past, I didn't have to worry about a lot of the PCI requirements because all of the payment information is entered into an iframe that's on my page by the end users. Now they actually still have to follow these requirements. They still need to inventory all of the scripts that are on their payment page, because PCI realizes that Magecart attacks are such a big risk and are likely to become more and more prevalent that even for the organizations that have iframes, they still have to start this process.
And if we look at the cost of doing nothing or thinking, hey, it might not happen to us, which of course is not advisable, are you able to share any examples of recent Magecart attacks and some of the consequences that they've had for impacted businesses?
So, I mean, if we're thinking very general, right, you might have fines that are levied on you. Maybe organizations wouldn't want to work with your organization if you don't comply with PCI, and those can both have devastating consequences. If we're thinking of a couple of attacks that are recent, the first one I want to call out that many security practitioners in the space probably have heard is the polyfill.io attack.
Yeah.
This, I don't know necessarily if I call it like a strict Magecart attack, because, and I'll explain a little more detail, there wasn't actual data that was being stolen. At least that's as far as like the researchers that are analyzing the obfuscated script. They don't think, at least at this point, that data is actually being stolen. But pretty much what was happening with this attack is that this cdn.polyfill.io was originally owned by one organization. Then earlier this year, it changed ownership and became owned by a Chinese organization. And in around June of 2024, researchers were looking into this, and they realized that this script was actually, instead of doing what it was originally just doing, it now also redirected users to malicious scripts. So any website that already had the cdn.polyfill.io domain executing on their site, and maybe they had it in there in the past because it was a legitimate domain to have, it now was actually redirecting their users to malicious sites. Like we've seen, they were redirected to sports betting or maybe adult content platforms based on their geographical location. Now, the reason that I specifically said at the beginning that I don't know if this qualifies as an exact Magecart attack, just because the outcome of this was pretty good from like, at least as far as good as you could be from a security incident like this, because instead of data being stolen, users were only, I'll put that in quotation marks, or redirected to undesired sites, which even though that's still a negative experience or not good security, it is at least a little better than their actual data being stolen. But I still wanted to call this out because a lot of organizations are now seeing this as this could have been a lot worse. This could have been an actual Magecart attack. And we've seen that anywhere from 100,000 to several million websites were impacted by this domain. I'm sure that there are still many different organizations that are working on removing this website from their domains. So I wanted to make sure to call that out and show that it's very easy for many different organizations to be hit, especially by third-party scripts that are being added onto their domains. I did quickly want to call out another one.
Yeah, sure.
This one is actually from Q4 of 2023. And the name of this is, it might be referred as like the 404 page attack. And pretty much what was happening is this was a legitimate Magecart attack. So end users' data was actually being stolen. But really what was unique about this attack was that they were reusing really advanced concealment techniques. And one of them, which researchers have never really seen before, and the reason that's called the 404 error attack is because the attackers were actually manipulating the website's default 404 error pages to hide the malicious JavaScript code. So this like very short snippet of code that the reason that we all make it short or they make it obfuscated is to make it a lot more difficult for any security practitioners or developers, if they're quickly scanning the code, to be able to detect that there's something wrong. The short snippet of code was then, once it executed, it was fetching the malicious code at runtime, and then the longer string of malicious code was then executing the attack and stealing the sensitive data that customers were entering in. So the reason I specifically want to call this out is because we are seeing that the attackers are becoming a lot more advanced and sophisticated. They know that more organizations are putting in detection mechanisms in place. So just like we know it's a cat and mouse game, so the attackers are once again leveling up and figuring out, well, how can we better hide our malicious JavaScript in, different places that the security professionals might not be as likely to look out.
And I always try to give everyone listening actionable tips and advice. And I know the answer to this question I'm about to ask you could be a podcast episode in its own right. But are there any strategies and technologies that businesses should be implementing to protect themselves against these client-side attacks that we're talking about, while also at the same time complying with the new version of PCI?
Yeah, so I'd like to call out like 3 action items that organizations can do. So first and foremost, develop a strong communication process between the marketing team, the application development team, and the security team. Because the marketing team and the development teams, they're the ones who are adding this JavaScript. And it's very important that the security team is aware of any existing JavaScript that was added by either the marketing or development team, but also any new scripts that they want to add, so that to make sure that they are properly vetted, there's nothing obviously malicious from the get-go. Second, thing I would like to add is that organizations should make sure to limit the number of scripts that are on their payment page or any other page where sensitive information can be entered into forms. So for example, like your login page, or if customers are entering in any medical information about themselves, because we know that any third-party JavaScript that you add onto a page now has access to all of the data that customers are entering in onto that page. So it's a really great way to reduce the likelihood of an attack simply by only putting the JavaScript that's really pertinent in order to stay on there, and don't have any superfluous script on any of your sensitive pages. And lastly, of course, organizations should implement a tool that provides them with visibility. Once again, getting rid of that blind spot on the client side, and also gives them the ability to mitigate and block any undesired JavaScript in case they do detect that there's something suspicious and undesired on their client side.
And of course, I would also add that this is not a challenge or a series of challenges that you do need to attempt to overcome on your own. And with that point in mind, how do you at Imperva support businesses in mitigating some of these risks we're talking about here that are associated with client-side attacks, and ultimately ensuring that they meet these new PCI standards?
So Imperva has a really wonderful product, though I might be biased as the product manager, called Client-Side Protection. We originally actually launched this product back in 2020 to help organizations reduce the risk of the Magecart attack, because we already saw that there was a rise in this, and we wanted to ensure that our customers have a way to better protect their client side. And since then, once the PCI standard came out, we realized that we already have a really great foundation to provide customers with not only the value of security and protecting their sites from client-side attacks like Magecart, but also providing them with the value of making the compliance process easier for them for the two PCI requirements that I mentioned earlier. So this is a very easy way for organizations to start getting that visibility, provide a lot of different insights about the different domains and the scripts that we discover on your client side, give you the ability to either work with a allow list or a block list, depending on which security methodology better works for your organization. And of course, we have lots of features in there and reports in there that help organizations then better prove their compliance with the two requirements during the time of their audit.
Love that. And as we look ahead, we're already only 5 months away from 2025, of course. So what trends do you foresee in the landscape of cybersecurity threats, and anything else that businesses should be preparing for, and the evolving nature of client-side attacks? We're already hearing about AI and good AI versus bad AI, etc. But what are you seeing here?
First of all, like I've been saying this entire episode, organizations should right now start putting in a tool in place that's going to help them get that visibility into what's executing on their client side. And this is very important because we know that we not only have to make sure that for the sake of the organization that the application is secure, but for all of the end users that are actually interacting with the application, assuming that it's secure. And it's very important that organizations take all the steps that they can in order to protect all of the end users that are using their application. Now, the reason why it's so important that they do it now, whether or not they need to comply with PCI, is because we know that attackers are becoming more and more sophisticated and are doing more work in order to hide their malicious JavaScript code, whether that's hiding it in place that you wouldn't think that it would be there, like in the 404 attack that I mentioned earlier. Another way that we've seen attackers do this is actually by impersonating legitimate domain names. So, for example, you could think this might be like a very obvious one to spot with your naked eye, but let's say Google, right? So there's two O's in there. An attacker, in theory, could substitute the two O's for two zeros and hope that someone just quickly glancing through their scripts that are executing on their client side wouldn't notice. So this is another technique that we're seeing that attackers are trying to do. And that's why it's so important to not only have a tool that can provide you with the inventory, but does have more of like those insights pieces, gives you more information about what these domains are, because even though the naked eye might think like, oh, this looks familiar, I think I know what this is, a tool that can bring you those additional details about the discovered domains or script that are executing on your client side would be able to flag that, hey, this isn't what you think it is. The last trend that I would say that I see related to Magecart attacks is compromising more third parties. We saw that with compromising of the supply chain, attackers really get a really big bang for their buck, right? They can compromise one JavaScript and then end up impacting, maybe it could be hundreds or thousands of different organizations that are actually leveraging that third-party code. So make sure, once again, that you have a good understanding for what is this third-party code that you're actually pulling onto your site. And, I guess really the message for the day is make sure that if it's going to be executing on your client side, it's actually supposed to be on there. I'm going to see that it's going to be harder in order to actually detect them without a proper tool in place to be able to bring this visibility for security practitioners.
Fantastic advice. And I cannot thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your insights today. But before I let you go, I want to have a little fun with you and ask you to leave one final gift to everyone listening. We have a Spotify playlist and an Amazon wish list. I'm going to ask you, can you leave us a book that means something to you or a favourite song that means something to you? We'll get it added to one of those lists. I don't mind which it is. Guilty pleasures are allowed. You can add the PCI song if you want. But what would you like to leave everyone listening with and why?
So this is one of my favorite songs that I discovered around a year ago. And I know once I say the song, many people are going to be like, how did you not know about this earlier? So what I'm going to contribute is Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. This is a really beautiful song, very catchy, and the lyrics are, I think, very meaningful as well. I only discovered this a year ago when I went to a really wonderful concert by the San Francisco Symphony. Every year during Pride Month, they do a collaboration with the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. And last year, they did a really wonderful show all focusing around Elton John and The Wizard of Oz and some other great musicals. And that's really when I had a deeper listening to Elton John's songs. And as you can imagine, having like a live symphony, a live chorus in front of you, it was really the first time where I was like, for all these years when people have been saying that Elton John is amazing, I get it now. So that's the song that I'd like to contribute to the playlist.
Absolutely lovely. What a great choice. I can't believe it took you so long to find it, but it is a great song. So I will get that added to our Spotify playlist. And obviously, for anybody listening wanting to find out more information about Imperva, contact you or your team, or just find out anything or explore a little bit deeper on anything we talked about today, where would you like to send them?
So we have a very easy place that you can find us. Go to imperva.com. You'll be able to learn all about the different suite of products and how we can protect both your applications and also your data side as well. And you can also reach out directly to our sales team on there in case you would like to learn more.
Well, we covered so much today, from the rise of those Magecart attacks and the new PCI requirements, what they mean for businesses. I think we talked about in a language everyone can understand. So hopefully everyone will take something away from that. And for anybody listening that hasn't heard Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, let's sort that out as well. Let's get straight on that. But more than anything, thanks for joining me today, Lynn.
Thank you so much for having me.
As we wrap up today's insightful discussion with Lynn Marks, I think it's clear that the evolution of client-side attacks demands vigilant and sophisticated defence strategies, especially in light of the new PCI DSS standards. So the big question for everybody listening, how prepared are you and your organisation to meet these updated requirements and ultimately protect against these increasingly cunning cyber attacks? Well, I hope today's conversation has illuminated some of the crucial measures that you can take to fortify your defences, but I invite you to share your thoughts and experiences in how you're dealing with these client-side security challenges. Let me know how you're adapting to the evolving cybersecurity landscape. Please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilC.Hughes. But that's it for today. I'll be back again tomorrow with another topic that we'll explore together. But thank you for listening today, and until next time, don't be a stranger.